Take your Bibles this morning and go to Mark chapter 8. And I also want you to hold Matthew chapter 16 because we're going to jump there for a reference. And we'll be there for a bit. But right now, if you would make your way to Mark chapter 8. And as you know, we're in a series for this summer called Believing Loyalty. And right now, we're looking at the life of Peter for a few weeks. And we are learning where Peter started, some of the struggles he went through, and what we call believing loyalty. Because believing loyalty is not perfection and is not instantaneous spiritual maturity. We grow into it. We call that sanctification. And so we saw that Peter is called on the seashore to follow Jesus. He does. But through that ministry, he has some ups and downs and he has some struggles before he reaches the man he is in the early chapters of Acts. And so what Jesus has done, he has called his disciples and he has left the Jewish areas in the book of Mark and he's crossed over into the Gentile areas. So very early on we learn that Jesus is not only God to the Jews but also to the Gentiles. He's healed the Syrophoenician woman. He's cast out demons out of the demoniac. He's healed other Gentiles and Jews. So he has been crossing over. And the disciples, his closest followers. Now remember, there's more than just 12 disciples. There are many that follow him. Now the 12, the inner group 12 become the apostles. They are disciples, but there are many disciples. And so Jesus is trying to teach his disciples that he is crossing over and is going to be a God to the Gentiles, to us. And they are not getting it. His disciples aren't putting all this together. And in the previous chapters, what we've seen in Mark, it said the Bible said they had not yet gained the insight of what Jesus was doing because their heart was hardened. Hardened by what? Hatred. They hated Rome. They hated the Gentiles. They didn't like going to these areas. Early in Mark, in chapter 8, do you not see or understand? And they did not, the disciples, because they had a hardened heart. Jesus said, having eyes you do not see, having ears you do not hear. You don't understand what all the feeding of the thousands has been about. Jesus telling the disciples, you hadn't put it together. And so now in Mark, what we have learned that Jesus has crossed over from Jewish territory. He's gone into the area of 10 Roman cities to the Decapolis. And he's done work there. And now today, he's about to change locations to the extreme. If you think crossing over to the areas he's crossed over to so far is a shock to the disciples, they hadn't seen anything yet. Mark 8:27, I'm going to read through 38. Beginning at Mark 8:27, Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. To help you put that in the context of what that is, that means Caesar Philip. And on the way, or Matthew's version said, when they came to this place, he asked his disciples he asked this question of his disciples. He asked his disciples this question at Caesarea Philippi: who do people say that I am? You've probably heard that. It's kind of a popular Bible verse and a story. So Jesus asked them, who do people say that I am? And they, the group of disciples following him, they told him, saying, well, some people say you're John the Baptist, others say you're Elijah, others say you're just one of the great prophets. And he continued by questioning them, all of them. But who do you all, this group that's following me, more than just the 12, who do you all say that I am? And Peter answers for the group. Most people think this is a conversation just between Jesus and Peter. It is not. Peter's answering for the group. He's kind of the spokesman, maybe the self-appointed spokesman. But he pipes in, he said, answered Jesus, said to him, you are the Christ. And there's more to that we'll see here in a minute. And Jesus warned them all that they should tell no one about him. Verse 31, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, that is Israel. And he must be killed, so he must suffer, he must be killed, and after 3 days he must rise again. 32, and Jesus was stating this matter plainly when Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. Same demonic rebuke word here. But turning around and seeing Jesus' disciples, he rebuked Peter. And he said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but your own, man's interest." Notice we have plurality here in the crowd. Verse 34, and Jesus summoned the crowd with his disciples. So there's a large following that's going with him, or maybe congregated there at Caesarea Philippi. We're not for sure. And he said to all of them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the sake of the gospel's sake, he will save his life. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, remember there at Caesarea Philippi, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Now, to understand the importance and the meaning of this moment in this question, you must understand the place, Caesarea Philippi. Probably this place, I shouldn't say as much as any place, that maybe more, the place inflects deep meaning on this question. By the fact of where Jesus asked this question at Caesarea Philippi, it has a great impact on how we would answer. Because Caesarea Philippi is a place like no other. And Jesus could have gone anywhere. But he asked the question at Caesarea Philippi, and the question is, who do you say that I am? And he continued questioning him about that. It wasn't just one question. He kept pressing them on this issue. Who do you say that I am? And Peter finally answers. No one else is going to say anything. They're not all piping up saying you're the Son of God. Peter finally says, well, you are the Christ. Now, Matthew's version, Matthew 16, Simon Peter answered this way, you are the Christ, and Matthew adds, the Son of the living God. So that was Peter's answer. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is what he said in this place. Now, let me bore you for a few minutes with some history and geography so that we can get a grasp on what we're dealing with here. I have a map up on screen for you that shows you where Caesarea Philippi would be in relation to Capernaum and Bethsaida in the Sea of Galilee. You know, we've been talking about Capernaum and Bethsaida to the north of the Sea of Galilee. They travel all the way up to Caesarea Philippi, which is about 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. It's at the foothills of what is known as Mount Hermon. It's a resort-type place, lush green water. It's a very beautiful place. I've never been there. We've had church members that have been there, and we'll have them come up and tell you about it on a Wednesday night coming up here in the future. And it was at this time, it was an impressive Greek-Roman city with a huge cave and water that flowed out of this cave that was one of the main tributaries into the Jordan River. Now, Caesarea Philippi, however, was associated with intense false god worship for many years before the Romans even got there. In fact, you see the area of Mount Hermon up there. This is where Israel worshiped Baal during the period of the kings, is in this same area. This area at Caesarea Philippi was close to the high place where Jeroboam, you remember when the kingdom of Israel split? Jeroboam set up a golden calf for the northern tribes of Israel to worship, which led to their downfall. So in this area, not only was there idol worship with the Greeks and the Romans, it was also the place of Baal worship with Israel. Originally, the Greeks called this city Pan, or Panias, and it was named after the Greek god Pan. If you have watched the old cartoons from the old days, you may recognize this, the Pan god. He was a fertility god that they would worship in this place. And he was in the cartoons. Remember the half goat, half man guy that jumped around in the woods and played the flute? That's the Pan god. That's how he was pictured. He was half goat, half man, and he played flute as an instrument. It is where we get our words panic or pandemonium. Comes from this false god Pan. Their belief that he would roam the woods at night chasing nymphs, and I'll just leave it at that. And so every time you were out in the wood and you heard a noise, it was the Pan god creating panic or pandemonium. And that's what they believed. And this was the home of the god Pan at Caesarea Philippi. That's how it began. Herod the Great. Remember Herod the Great, the guy who tried to kill Jesus when he was a baby? His son is named Philip. And Philip established this place as a capital in the territory, and he named it after Caesar in honor of the Roman emperor, and it became a large, flourishing Roman city, thus Caesarea Caesar Philip. Named after Caesar, Philip designated where it was, the territory it was in. To put this into a family context, Herod the Great, his other son was Herod Antipas. Do you know what Herod Antipas was famous for? He killed John the Baptist. So this family, they are the founders. I shouldn't say the founders of the city, but the founders of the renaming and the establishment of this in Roman culture as Caesarea Philippi. And this is where Jesus took his disciples. There's a second picture that I have for you. It's the temple grounds and what it would look like during Jesus' day. During the time of Christ, there were 5 main areas of worship to false gods. You see that there was a temple built to Augustus. You see the temple on the left? It was built to honor Caesar Augustus. There was a courtyard next to it, to the right of it. You see the court of Pan. There was a courtyard there to worship the false god Pan. There was another temple in the center dedicated to Zeus, the temple of Zeus, there in the center on that picture. And or on the right side in the picture, you see the upper tomb temple and the lower tomb temple. That is the place they called the temple of the dancing goats. They had an upper one and lower one. And it was a worldwide, Caesarea Philippi was a worldwide gathering place to worship false gods, dead gods. Jesus could have gone anywhere to ask his disciples this question. And he went here. And behind the temple, you see that there is a cave. Do you see the cave entrance? There is a cave there. And on the third picture that I have for you, during this day, this is what it looks like now. So you see all those old temple grounds right there where all the buildings were? You see that cave? Go back to the previous picture. You see the cave behind the temple of Augustus. Now this next picture we're on, the picture of the cave. Go forward. That's the cave as it looks like today. During Jesus' day, this gate, this cave was literally known as the gate of the underworld. They believed that was the gate to Hades at Caesarea Philippi. Children would be thrown alive into the entrance of this cave, sacrificing them to the god of Pan, believing it would appease the gods, bring fertility to their families and to their crops and to their businesses. In fact, it's changed now, but during Jesus' day, water would come out of that cave, and it was so deep and so much water they couldn't even measure how much was in there. And they would throw their children. Basically, you could say they aborted their children to a god of Pan. It was a sick cesspool of evil, represented the worst of Satan, and humanity had to offer. It was humanity unrestrained. And this is where Jesus asked the question, who do you all say that I am? Jews didn't go to this place, especially rabbis didn't go to this place. But Jesus is going to teach these hard-hearted disciples from this point on his purpose and the purpose of his church, standing in front of the gates of hell. You see that? Now, on those stages, the stages with the dancing goats, where they worship the god Pan, I can't even, I tried to find a nice way, a cordial way, a sophisticated way of telling you what went on those stages, and I can't. It was as bad as it gets in public. And Jesus brought them there. Now, I'm going to say something. I'm going to try to say this as easy as I can because we have to relate this to today. And this is what I'm going to tell you. This place is a place of complete self-indulgence, Caesarea Philippi. You would travel to this resort. Vegas and Mardi Gras had nothing on this. Nothing. Several years ago, I had some men come in my office and they gave me a pretty good chewing because I would not preach Veterans Day sermons. They came into my office and they said, you can set aside preaching, almost word for word, you can set aside preaching and the Bible preaching for one Sunday, and we need to do ceremony and recognition of veterans. Well, I refused. I said, I'm not doing that. I will not do it. And it got pretty heated and debated. Probably the only thing that saved me is I am a veteran, so I did have some leg to stand on. I'm not doing it. That's a good thing. Veterans should be honored. There should be days. I have no problem with that. None at all. If we want to do that, we can do that. But let me put it to you in this context. I thought about it this way, and I said it back then. I'll say it again the same. You know how many hours there are in a year? 8,760. Don't nail me down to the exact hour on leap year and all the other stuff. I understand. But pretty much 8,760 hours in a year. There's 730 hours in a month. There's 168 hours in a week. At best, I get to teach and preach. And all the teachers here, we get to teach and preach, and you get to come and worship at best 12 hours a month together. At best. Think about it in those terms. Many come, and I'm not talking about your personal time of worship and study. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about us coming together and worshiping. Many worship 4 hours a month. Many worship 1 to 2 hours a month. I'm not condemning anyone for that. I'm not putting pressure. Everybody has work schedules and things. I understand. Just the way life is, but many come only 1 to 2 hours a month to hear the Word of God preached and them to be taught. And there would be some that would force me to take that one day, that 1 hour a week, maybe 4 hours a month, set it aside to worship, set aside worshiping the Jehovah God to worship ourselves. I will not do it. I don't care what the holiday is. I will not do it. And I hope you would agree with me. We're a culture of complete self-indulgence. Do we need now to turn the church into another institution for self-recognition and self-glorification? We will not. If we cannot, listen to me very closely, if we cannot worship God 1 hour a week and get ourselves out of the way, we are no different than the idolaters on stage at Caesarea Philippi. There is no difference. They may be more extreme than us, but it's still self-glorification. And that's what Caesarea Philippi was, the place where Jesus asked this question, a disgusting cesspool of self-indulgence. And you know idolatry is always the same. whether it was in Jesus' day and our day, it only boils down to three categories. Idolatry comes from three categories: prosperity, power, or pleasure. I don't care what you call the false god. They all worship one of those gods for one of these areas. They want prosperity, they want power, or they want pleasure. And they will invent a god that will give them that right to do so. And so the question is, who do you say he is? And so we need to be reminded, he is the Christ. He is the Son of the living God. He is the Son of man. And he stands in contrast to all that is worshipped at Caesarea Philippi, which is self. You must and I must decide between Caesarea Philippi and Jesus. That's why he brought them there. Make your choice. What frightens me the most, if you read Revelation, we're studying in my class, the beginning of Revelation, we have to be very careful. We leave our first love, we fall into false prophet preaching, we go into self-indulgence and the doctrine of Balaam and Jezebel and all these other things. You know what Jesus says about our place as a church? I will remove you. And we will not be removed as a place and a light for the world. We agreed? I hope so. Let's look at the next one that we have. Upon this rock, he said, I will build my church. We're going to go to Matthew 16 in Matthew's version for this. Matthew gives us a little bit more detail. Same event, same circumstance, same place. All the same. Matthew's also recording it. Matthew's the eyewitness here, and he's recording it. Let's see how Matthew puts this down. He gives us some deep detail. So Simon Peter answered the question, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is Matthew 16:16. Verse 17, and Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Bar-Jonah just means son of Jonah. So blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Think about it. Think about all that Peter has seen. The sick has been raised. The dead has been raised. The sea has been calmed. And when he answered this question, Jesus said, all that you have seen in your flesh and blood, all those miracles, that is not revealed to you who I am. But my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. Isn't that an amazing statement? It all goes together. Verse 18, I also say to you that you are Peter. Peter just means a pebble or a stone, not a rock. That you, Peter, upon this rock, I will build my church. So upon you, stone, pebble, and upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I want you to look at that. Upon this rock and upon you. You're Peter, and upon this rock, I will build my church. Now, there comes now a debate at what Jesus is talking about. Who is the rock here, and what is the rock? Well, I could give you a whole discourse, but let me just answer the question very quickly. The rock is not Peter. He is not the Pope. This is not the beginning of secession of papacy. That's not what this is. It's it's just not. I'll get sidetracked here in a minute. Let's stay on course. But remember, Caesarea Philippi is at the base of Mount Hermon. If you go back to that picture of the cave that's on screen, historians and guides say that this is the largest single rock formation in the area of Palestine and Israel. It's one large bedrock, what they would be looking at. Here, on this one rock, this one large bedrock, what we all talked about, it's the cave of Pan, the bottomless pit. And the Greeks believed this was the dwelling place of Pan, as we've already said. This is the place, this rock that they're looking at, Jesus' disciples are looking at. This rock, as you already know, was commonly called the gates of hell. And when Jesus is standing up in this place and they're looking at this rock, Jesus said, upon this rock will I build my church. Isn't that something? See why the place has so much meaning? It's not just the literal place, though. It's what this place represents. Not saying I'm going to build a church building here. But what this place represents, it's a profound statement. And I want you to think with me. I just listed a few. Jesus didn't say, I'm going to build my church, and he did not go to Jerusalem to say this. In fact, we'll find out Mark, he cursed Jerusalem. He didn't go to Mount Zion, that is Jerusalem. He didn't go to Shechem. He didn't go to Jericho. He didn't go to Mount Sinai, where the law was given. He didn't go to the valley of Elah, where David defeated Goliath. He didn't go to Bethlehem. He didn't go to Nazareth. He didn't go to Mount Carmel, where Elijah defeated Baal. He didn't go to Mount Olives. He didn't go to Mount Moriah. He went to Mount Hermon, the place of Baal worship with Israel. Caesarea Philippi, the gates of hell is where he went, what they believed to be in that day. He went to the city of Zeus and Caesar and the irregular Jew Philip, the family that murdered John the Baptist. And he said, here is where I'm going to build my church, meaning I'm going to bring life and I'm going to cap it on top of death. See what he's saying? All of this you see at Caesarea Philippi is death. And what I'm going to bring to this place is life. You see this? You see why he took them there? Now, Satan deceives cultures. That's what he does. He always has. He always will. And the ideology of Satan is this. It's equality and tolerance. That's the ideology of Satan. And it sounds good that I will live for myself. I will live my truth. I will self-determine who I am. And in this culture of ideology of equality and tolerance and freedom, that means we are free now in our culture to indulge in any sexual desire or act. Cultural freedom, moral freedom without the restraint of this silly religious stuff. And it all sounds good for a while, and sin is good for a season. But then what happens? You don't have to be a scholar or a theologian. Just look around to see what happens when a culture is built upon the idolatry or the ideology and idolatry of complete equality and freedom and tolerance of sin. It always ends in death. We call it woke. And everything in woke kills everything else. Look around, it's evident. Death just does not mean the death of the literal body. Death, the word just means separation. That's all it means, separate. And it is the death of things like our communities, our race relations, our economics, our education, our identities, and our culture have been murdered. Have they not? Look around. Families are being torn apart. Abortion. Now, I'm not political with it. Abortion is not a political issue. It's not now that abortion is wrong, but if you're against abortion, there's something wrong with you. You understand abortion now goes to post-birth in some states? Can you imagine that? And if you speak out against it, you're the evil one? That is the culture we are in. The ideology of equality and freedom and tolerance always, always, always ends in death. It's the death of gender and sexuality and masculinity and femininity. Have these not been just murdered? Yes, they have. Youth, spirituality, peace, contentment. In 4 or 5 years, our society has changed so rapidly we don't even recognize it anymore. All built on the satanic idolatry of equality, tolerance, and freedom. It sounds good. But without restraint of self-indulgence, it just all ends in the cave of Pan, death. Life ends. Look around. Do we not live in panic and pandemonium in our culture? You better believe it. Yes, we do. It's the same thing. Jesus went to Caesarea Philippi, to this place, And in this place is where he asked this question. And then he said, upon this rock I will build my church. Think of it this way. And this is hard for us to grasp. They're looking at this scene, and Jesus said, with these people in this city, with those people and worshiping those temples, and with those people throwing their babies into their cave, into that cave for worship, they're also going to build my church. Because I'm here to bring them life. Because you know who all those people at Caesarea Philippi are, don't you? They're us. They're the Gentiles. And Jesus brings this group and he says, I'm going to bring those Gentiles life. Isn't that something? It's a great picture. You understand why he went there. And it was here that Jesus renames Simon to Peter. Now, there's a couple things, but I like to think of it this way. Do you remember all the memorial stones they set up in the Bible? When they did something great in the Old Testament, they set up a memorial stone. I think that's partly what Jesus is doing here with Peter. I'm going to rename you. We're looking at this giant rock. Well, I'm going to rename you Stone, Peter. And you're going to, every time someone mentions your name, you're going to remember this place. You're going to remember this message. You're going to remember what I said. You're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember this scene. And Peter, you're going to be an integral part in bringing the gospel to the Gentiles. Don't you ever forget it. And he would be, wouldn't he? And on this rock that they would be looking at over the gates of hell, God's going to take a bunch of godless Gentiles and hard-hearted disciples, and they're going to spread the gospel and bring life where there is death. And here I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot stop me. Then he goes on to this last section I want to talk about. He says, if anyone wishes to come after me, this is verse 31 through 34. I'm not going to read them all again, but basically 31 said, he began to teach him, Son of Man must suffer. He must be killed, and he must rise again. 32, that's where Peter rebuked him. 33, get behind me, Satan. Let's come to 34. He summoned the crowd with his disciples, said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me, and he continues on. Now let's clear up one thing here. When Jesus said, Peter or Simon Peter, get behind me, Satan, that's what he rebukes him directly. He took him aside after Peter took Jesus aside and rebuked him. Then turning around, Jesus, seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter in front of everyone and said, get behind me, Satan. Now, don't take that as to believe that Simon Peter is demon-possessed here, and he's in control of Satan. The word just means adversary. It is a name, but it's also just a word. And so what Jesus is saying to Simon Peter is, you're being adversarial to me. You're being my adversary in this moment. Like Satan is my adversary, now you are being my adversary. And what an adversary does is you're tempting me. You are tempting me in this moment not to die because you didn't like what I just said, that I must die. And then he goes on to say, at this place, Caesarea Philippi, Jesus is calling out all his disciples, and he's saying to them, you got to decide right now in this city, in this moment, you've got to decide who you're going to follow, me or them, a living God or a bunch of dead gods. You got to decide right now, because he really says, look at how he puts it, your mind is on yourself. Your mind is not on the things of God. Your mind is on man. Your mind's on yourself. And we all know what that is. They argued over who was the greatest. James and John's mother even came and asked Jesus to give them special positions on the throne, beside the throne. They wanted to overthrow Rome. And now here is Peter tempting Jesus again to do that very thing, be an earthly king. And it is a true temptation, by the way. And he said, you're not setting your mind on the things of God. And here's what Jesus is saying it this way: to save all of these godless Gentiles, something's got to happen. So right now, you either follow me, that means you lose your life, or you get behind me. The wording there is you go away and you follow Zeus, Pan, Caesar, whoever. You remember what Joshua said when they entered the promised land? You decide today whom you're going to serve. If you're going to serve the false gods on the other side of the river, get to stepping. But as for me, we're going to serve the Lord. This is that kind of moment right here at Caesarea Philippi. A choice. Decide, Peter. Decide, disciples, right now. Because there was always this temptation put before Jesus from the tempting in the wilderness for Jesus not to die for us. It was always there. Be an earthly king. Don't die for the Gentiles. That pressure was put on him through his life. And that's what Peter is rebuking Jesus about his death, because Jesus is blind to the Gentiles. He doesn't see it. When we're looking at this wording, deny yourself and take up your cross, most people think of an execution. And that is possible, but that's really not what Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about, yeah, you may be executed for being a Christian. I'm not saying that. But really, what is he saying? You have to give up yourself. Give up your life. Give up all that self-indulgent behavior you see on these stages here at Caesarea Philippi. Give up these dead gods that do nothing for you. You have to choose. So it's not just talking maybe a literal execution, but you have to get up to yourself and die daily. All those things your flesh desires to do that take you away to follow yourself, you have to leave that behind and you have to follow me. Stop following yourself and man and follow me. That's what he is saying. Because here's a theological point to all of this. There is only one way to defeat death. There is only one. And you know what it is. Someone has to die. And then that one who died must rise again. That's how death is defeated, isn't it? What is death? You can't hold them down. Can't keep them in the grave. So if death cannot keep you separated, and the one who dies rises again, not only rises again, but never dies again. There's a lot of people been raised from the dead, but they all died again. There's only one first fruit of the resurrection that died, rose again, and never died again. And that is Jesus Christ. And that's why he is speaking of his death when he said, I must die. Why? Because I can rise again. Because remember, they're at Caesarea Philippi. They're standing in what the world believed. Of course, we know it's not true, but what they believed were the gates of hell. And they're standing in this place, and these gates of hell, gates are always defensive. They're always to keep really something out, basically. Yeah, you can't keep stuff in, but it's really to keep stuff out and keep stuff in. But it symbolized a stronghold in that place. And what it symbolized to those people in that place, and maybe even the disciples, that this is Satan's territory. This is his place. That's the entrance to his domain. No one can go in there. And if you go in there, you may not ever come out, because Satan has authority and he has the keys to that gate. Does that make sense? So it's a defensive area of this is Satan's world, and there's a gate there. And in that gate, Satan has control of that. And so when Jesus said, I'm going to die, basically is what he is telling that crowd, y'all understand, I'm going to enter that cave. I'm going to go down to Hades, a place of the dead. I'm going to go into that bottomless pit. I'm going to defeat death, Hades, Satan, Pan, whatever you want to call him. And I'm going to come out with the keys of death. And I'm coming out. That's why Revelation 1:17 says, I am the first, the last, 18, and the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And I have what? The keys of death and Hades. Now Jesus, through his death, this imagery, he's telling them, I'm going into that place. I'm defeating death, and when I come back, I'll have authority over it. That's what he's saying. And what does he say? And I'm going to build my church on top of it. Isn't that something? They're at a literal place. What the world believed, the entrance to hell. And Jesus says, I'm going to cap it with life. And then, all of you Jews, you Gentiles, you spread the gospel of this message of life. That Satan no longer can control death. I do. I have the keys to that gate. And that nothing in there, in that place, in that gate can withstand me. Nothing. See what he's doing here in this place? What a profound moment when you look at this cave, this tomb. Put it back on screen one more time. When you look at this place to follow him, that Jesus took Peter here. And he said at the gate of hell, Peter, you make your decision right now. Follow me. Deny all yourself in this seeking thrones and positions and being the boss. Stop trying to worry about overthrowing the Roman government and all of this stuff in man's head. Deny all of that right here at the gates of hell and follow me. So when Jesus said, who do you say that I am? Peter said, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. Not a bunch of dead gods. You're the living God. This has great impact on us today. It is because of this moment and what Jesus is saying that you and I are saved. We have access because Jesus controls death. And instead of wandering off being thrown into some bottomless pit, Jesus has capped the message of the gospel over top of it. And he says, all who come to me, I'll give you life. They just give you death. I'll give you life. And life more abundant. Does that make sense? It's a great, great spot, isn't it? Great place in the Bible for this to happen. Now, don't go out and say, I didn't say Jesus is not the rock. There's a lot of other verses, yes, he is the rock. But here in this instance, what he's talking about is the rock is what Jesus is going to bring life over death. Make sense? Lord, we come to you today. We thank you for your word and the message that we have. Lord, there's so much in your word that we sometimes don't immediately come to realize, but we spend some time and it becomes abundantly clear who you are and your purpose. And Lord, we live in a culture that it's so easy to get sidetracked into self-glorification and self-worship and self-indulgence and into a world where we don't combat sin anymore. We just take things as they come as being defeated. But we know that that is not our purpose and our role. Our role is to bring life to death. And that is through the gospel, the preaching of Jesus Christ, who has defeated death. And then if we get off into self-glorification, that means others suffer possibly great cost of eternal death. And so, Lord, we always pray that we want to be a church that is focused on your word, preaching your word, learning from your word. And in the time we come together, nothing would take your place. That you would always be in the preeminent spot of worship and preaching in this moment that we come together. So Lord, I pray that we all agree on this today and that we all are of the same mind, that is why we exist and that is why the church is here. Lord, I thank you for the people that are here this morning and their devotion and their commitment and their lifelong loyalty.